What's up, Guru Nation? Let's demystify clinical research.
Guru Nation, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. Really means a lot to me. Look, this one is for the clinicians or anyone who's a friend or a family or even knows clinicians that are interested in participating in clinical research. One of my mission is to increase awareness amongst community clinicians to do clinical research, because I think it's better off for diversity. I think it's better off for finding the solutions to recruitment problems that are plaguing our industry and have been plaguing our industry since the beginning of clinical research. It's that we're not having enough real community clinicians doing research. And we're trying to change that one clinician at a time, one site owner at a time. So again, whether you're a clinician or whether you are somebody who knows a clinician or wants to partner with a clinician, this video is for you. So first of all, let me give you a brief overview of what, in practical terms, because if you go do good clinical practice, which anyone can do for free right now, you can get GCP certified, which anyone who works in this industry is going to need to get. It's not going to tell you any of this stuff. It's going to tell you go to clinical practice, but it's not going to tell you the pragmatic approach to how you can integrate research into your private practice or how you can bring research to a private practice. Because ultimately, I believe if we want to really get serious about increasing access to clinical research for study participants across the country, or just patients, because patients are not study participants until they are aware of a study in their area. And most patients will rather trust their own clinician than a stranger to talk to them about clinical research. So whether you have your private practice or whether you are aware of a private practice that you can collaborate with, that is very important. And perhaps that is where we should first start. Because yes, there are plenty of research clinics out there that do not have private practice associated with themselves. They rely strictly on advertising, whether it's TV, newspaper, social media. But I believe the best way to be successful and to really set yourself up for the most amount of success is to have access to a private practice, whether it's through a clinician, that it's your own private practice, or a colleague of yours. So really think about how you're going to enroll patients in your studies. Because let me tell you, these studies, I've been doing this since 2005, they're getting more complex. The inclusion-exclusion criteria is getting stricter. So you're going to need a large volume of patients to even have a chance to enroll successfully in a study. And by enroll successfully, I mean randomizing, not screening. You're going to have to go through a lot of screenings, which you get paid for a good amount of them. You're going to have to go through a lot of screenings in order to find the right amount of patients to randomize. These days, usually, there's 80% screen fail rates. So 80% screen fail rates on average means only 2 out of 10 patients you screen will actually be enrolled, will actually randomize in a study. Now, depending on how you negotiate your contract with the sponsor or CRO, which we help, my company DSCS Sweat Equity Investments, we work with research sites on a daily basis to negotiate their budgets, help them find studies, help them with their SOPs, help them create source documents, a shoulder to cry on, whatever the case may be. The link is underneath the video to my consulting firm, DSCS Sweat Equity Investments, also DSCS CRO, because we do some CRO projects as well. You're going to have to go through a lot of patients just to get 2 patients randomized, and you really only get paid on randomizations. I just said you get paid, reimbursed for screen failures, but it's usually at a ratio of how many you randomized. So that's a topic for another podcast, but just know you're going to need more patients than you think in order to randomize, let's say, 10 patients for a study. If you can randomize 10 patients in a study that's not a vaccine study, but I'm talking about an obesity study, a diabetes study, an osteoarthritis of the knee study, a dermatitis study, a depression study, you're doing good revenue. You're doing solid revenue. Typically for these studies, the average reimbursement per patient visit is $2,000 a visit. So if you have a study where each patient has 12 visits, that is $24,000 off of one randomized patient that completed the whole study. So if you can get 10, you're looking at $240K, $250,000, just off of 10 patients in one study. Sites do 7 to 50 studies a year on the most part. The really small sites do, like Yuma Clinical Trials. We're a 2-year startup. We actually, as of the date of this recording, we haven't even officially turned 2 yet. We have right now 5 active studies, and we are putting about 10 patients randomized per protocol on average. So that's the numbers, back of the napkin numbers. Now, time commitment. You might be thinking, if you're a clinician, well, that's great, but I'm a high volume practice, and in an hour, I see 3 or 4 patients. Well, I'll tell you, that's great, but you should continue to do that. Research is not looking to take away from that. Matter of fact, you're more valuable for your research site if you continue to see patients, because I just said the amount of patients you need to actually have in your database to be successful in finding the right patients is a lot. So your chances go up a lot the more patients you see. This is where the delegation of authorities comes into play. If you are an MD, you can be the PI. If you're a DO, you can be the PI. By PI, I mean principal investigator. You may need to delegate. Most likely, you will need to have a study coordinator. Study coordinator salary varies. It's going to be hard to find an experienced study coordinator, so you're going to have to find one with potential and train them. We have the CRC Academy for that very purpose. But let's say you do find an experienced study coordinator, it's going to cost you between $60 to $80K, depending on how much experience they have and where they are located in the country. Where I'm at in Yuma, Arizona, it's on the much lower side of that, just because supply and demand. If you are in a place like Los Angeles or Miami, it's a lot higher than that because, again, supply and demand. A lot of research clinics in Miami. It will also behoove you to have nurse practitioners or physician assistants or RNs be your sub-investigators so that they can do a lot of the clinical assessments for you. Now, there's certain things that you and only the PI should do, like review labs, review EKGs, review the severity of adverse events, and things like that. But you can still have staff that are delegated to reviewing labs as long as you're maintaining PI oversight. PI oversight's a whole nother topic. We're probably going to have to do another video just on that alone. The Cliff Notes version is, as long as you're maintaining adequate safety oversight of your patients and you're following good clinical practice and you're following the protocol, you're good to go. The industry, the regulators allow a lot of discretion on your behalf as the PI. Now, this is where I will share a story. One of our clients from Florida had a private practice. She started with us, I want to say 7 years ago. She was one of our first clients. She got so successful at doing research, she actually quit her private practice to do research full time. Now, you will maybe get to that point as well. The temptation is going to be to quit the private practice, but keep in mind, that's what got you there. The fact that you had a busy private practice is what made you successful in research. So if you're thinking of doing that, you need to think of who is going to be your referral source. It's the most important part of your job as a research site owner or director. Have a database of patients. You can have a database of your own research patients after a while, but nothing beats nothing beats having the patients from your own private practice or a close colleague and a trusted referral source. So this client generating multi-million dollars a year. There's the next thing is the risk to your medical license. One of the myths in this industry is, oh, well, when you start doing principal investigator work, you're risking your license. Unless you're intentionally trying to hurt patients in your studies, like, and quite literally, like intentionally trying to hurt or cause fraud, meaning you're just making up data that doesn't exist. You're creating patients out of thin air. You have no risk to your medical license. In the studies, you are indemnified, meaning the sponsors hold you harmless as long as you're following good clinical practice and you're operating within the scope of the protocol. So if you're not deviating from the protocol and you're following good clinical practice, which means patient safety above all else, you're good. I've never met a doctor who's had an issue with their medical license that was following good clinical practice in the protocol. And it's very difficult to violate the protocol and good clinical practice to the extent to where you will have a negative mark or a disciplinary action on your medical license. It is just not that common. The worst that could happen, besides losing your license, which again, you would have to have committed fraud, is to get an FDA audit where they find for cause and significant errors where they no longer recommend you do research. And you can actually get what's called a warning letter, which means you cannot do research anymore. So that's the second to worst thing that can happen, is you can't do research anymore. And again, it's very tough to get there unless you just have gross negligence or are just harming your patients, which if you're watching this video, chances are that's not you. Dedicated research staff is going to be critical. Having a clinical research coordinator is critical. I talked about what that's going to cost you. I recommend finding someone with potential and training them. We have a CRC Academy for that. And really for that first study, just like hold their hand, try to be involved more, walk them through it, or hire a consultant. Again, this is what we help with. This is why clinicians all across the country hire us for our services. The time commitment for you, if you are actually doing the clinical work, remember earlier I mentioned you can have sub-investigators like other doctors or nurses or nurse practitioners or physician assistants doing the clinical work like physical exams or like other assessments that only a licensed professional can do. If you don't have those people and it's just you doing that, and your goal is to randomize 10 patients in every study, you're only looking at 4 hours of work a week that you are doing. Your coordinator is working full time, 40 hours a week, but you yourself, 4 hours a week. And now if you have, let's say, a sub-investigator nurse practitioner who can do a lot of your clinical assessments, but they can't replace you with the oversight. Remember, keep that in mind, principal investigator oversight, but they can help you with all the other clinical assessments that they're allowed to do, that their license allows them to do in that state. You're looking at 1 hour a week. And that includes meeting with monitors. That includes saying hi to every patient. That includes being there to answer their questions. I mean, let's just say 1 to 5 hours a week per study is what you're looking to allocate towards this. So if you have 5 studies, you're looking at 5 to 25 hours a week. But that's what, if you're not delegating. At the max end of that is where you're not delegating, and there are economies of scale. So the more studies you do, the less time you actually need to spend overall, because your coordinators are more streamlined, your nurses are more streamlined, you have systems in place. I highly recommend something like an eSource or an eReg like Creo. Shout out to Creo, they sponsor. I also recommend something like Versatrile, which is absolutely free for keeping track of all the portals. There's going to be tons of portals that your coordinator is going to have to deal with, but if you want to keep track of all that stuff, have them use Versatrile and just have them invite you to it. It's free. You could use it. Free electronic regulatory documents is Viva Site Vault. Links to all this are underneath. And then once you start getting experience, free studies coming your way through Inato. So you'll use us, and then we hope that you'll continue to pay using us because of the budgets and all the other stuff we do. Us negotiating one budget for you pays for our service for the whole year, but it becomes easier to do research the longer you do it. Really, that 2-year mark, which is where my company is getting at right now, Yuma Clinical Trials, it becomes a lot easier if you can survive that initial 2 years. It becomes a lot easier because you start noticing studies start coming and you start figuring out streamlining the operations. All right. Finally, the revenue we discussed, the staff we discussed, the space, okay, and the equipment. The chances are, and if you really want to watch this, underneath my video is going to be another link to open your own clinic. And myself and Chris literally walk you through the bare bones minimum of what you need to be inside your clinic. So you need a centrifuge. You need equipment to check blood pressure, weight, height. You need a place for a phlebotomist or a place to draw blood. It could be your coordinator drawing blood. You need all the associated things that go with drawing blood. You need an ECG machine. Half of the studies provide you with one. The other half expect you to have one. The ratio might even be higher on the ones that provide. My clinic has more ECGs than we have studies at this point, more ECG machines than we have studies. You already have all of these things in your office if you are a practicing clinician. And the few things that you don't have are going to be things like a temperature controlled drug storage room. So you will have to dedicate a room that's 24/7 temperature controlled to store your IP. Okay, you might need some thermometers. I use Temp Stick. You might need a fridge. You might need a -20 freezer. You can go and get a -70, but as long as you have access to dry ice, you don't really need that. My site doesn't have that. We do have -20. So the equipment and the space, it's doable in your office. There is a little bit more space needed once you start getting more studies because each study sends you so many lab kits and so many boxes, and there's just supplies being sent to you constantly once you start a study that you will run out of space very quickly. My site, Yuma Clinical Trials, is experiencing this right now. We made it work, but we are outgrowing our space, and the option is moving upstairs to an attic, which we've been using it as a storage room in one of our clinicians' private practices. And we also have 4 other employees, and we don't think that's enough space for storage and for employees and a monitor. So we're going to be moving. We're going to be looking for a space to do our paperwork, but we're going to still see the patients in the clinics, and we're going to still store as much drug as we can in the clinics because that's where we need to dispense it to the patients, right? But you will eventually run out of space. And when that time comes, just look at the video I showed you. Look for about 1,500 square feet of office space you can use for overflow storage, coordinator workspace, just to get out of the way of the clinicians if they have busy practices, and then monitors start coming a lot. So there's a lot of space. Space is probably the biggest hurdle and the biggest underestimation of most clinicians when they take on research studies is the amount of stuff you're going to get and also the amount of emails you're going to get. So if you're a clinician thinking about doing this, I highly recommend getting a separate email address just for your clinical research activities so that your regular inbox does not get bombarded. And I do mean bombarded with emails. It's good to have those emails, but keep it separate and have a coordinator that's coordinating, like their name implies, everything for you. And then you as a clinician, refer patients, make sure the patients are safe, make sure you're checking their labs, EKGs, make sure that the assessments are being delegated to the appropriate staff, and make sure you're in compliance with the protocol and good clinical practice. And your monitors are going to come monitor your site every 6 to 8 weeks. And their job is to also make sure that you're compliant with this stuff. So all in all, I really think clinical research is the most underrated way for community clinicians to increase their revenues in their offices without hindering their private practice. Unless, in the example of our success story, and we have many clients like this, but this one's the most memorable, you want to stop your private practice because this person was making multiple seven figures just off of the research. And then they figured out a way to get the referral sources to continue. Then that's a good problem to have. And that's a topic. And that's something that you got to consider later. But for now, that's wishful thinking and you just want to get in. Hopefully this is some motivation for you guys. Only MD or DO can be PI. Sub-I, nurse practitioner. If you're a very experienced nurse practitioner with like decades of clinical research experience, you might be able to be a PI one day, but still most of the time they're going to want an MD or a DO. Finally, that hurdle to get that first study is the most difficult thing. This is what my company helps with, DSCS Sweat Equity and Investments. We have connections with sponsors who do very simple studies like phase 4 observational studies or lab collection studies where there's still research studies. You still need to consent patients and all of that stuff and follow GCP, but they're willing to give research naive patients a shot or research naive physicians a shot because they need more research naive patients, which is really the whole diversity issue. You start with some of those studies before you get to phase 2s and phase 3s. And we'll help you guys with that. Like, subscribe, comment, share. If you're interested in learning more about this, text me personally, 949-415-6256. Thank you.